Hi, I'm Ananda Fitzsimmons, and I want to share the message of regeneration. It is possible to regenerate the ecosystems on this planet and stop climate change. We know how to do it, but we need people to get on board. Everyday citizens can have an impact, and we need artists to help us start a movement and get the word out. First, to set the context, I need you to understand why it's so important for all of us to take action now in whatever ways we can. For the past 400,000 years, the number of parts per million of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere have never gone above 300 until the Industrial Revolution. Now they're at 400 parts per million and climbing. Having these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is what is causing global warming and climate change. There is a consensus from the scientists of the world that climate change is real and it's a serious problem. We're already experiencing the effects of it, and we're seeing unprecedented destructive weather events around the world. Once the CO2 is in the atmosphere, it stays there until it gets pulled down. Nature's way of pulling it down is through plants. Plants breathe CO2 from the air, breathe out oxygen, and take the carbon into their bodies to create biomass. When plants grow, they secrete liquid carbon from their roots to feed the microorganisms in the soil, which help the plants get the other nutrients that they need to keep growing. Animals eat the plants, and all living things are built out of carbon, water, and nutrients from the air and soil. When they die, some carbon turns back into gas as bodies decompose, but some of the carbon stays down in the earth, locked up in soil, or in the depths of the earth. We call this the carbon cycle. Some carbon cycles rapidly, but some get sunk into the earth for long periods of time. We call this the carbon sink because the carbon sinks into the earth and stays trapped there in places like peat bogs, in the depths of the ocean, and in soil humus. Fossil fuels are made from decayed matter that has been trapped deep in the earth for millions of years. But since the Industrial Revolution, we've been extracting those fossil fuels and burning them, which releases that stored carbon back into the atmosphere. Every day, humans burn more fossil fuel than the amount of water that flows over Niagara Falls. The equation is way out of balance. It took millions of years to make it and no time at all to burn it and release that CO2 back. There's less carbon being drawn down than carbon being released, and that hockey stick curve of parts per million of CO2 keeps going up. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, agricultural practices have released an estimated 135 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. The world is warming not only because fossil fuels are being burned, but also because soils, forests, and wetlands are being ravaged. Cities and farms are the source of a lot of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. We need to have farms to produce our food and cities to live in, but we could do these things differently, and we have the knowledge to do so. What we need is the will to make changes. There's a lot about the way we do modern agriculture that has a very heavy carbon footprint. Tilling the soil releases CO2 into the atmosphere and destroys the microbial life of the soil, causing erosion and a lot of other problems. Not having soil that's rich with microbes and organic matter makes it necessary to use more fertilizer. And fertilizer has a reaction in the soil which creates nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas far more potent than CO2. A huge percentage of our farmland is used to grow food for animals. Monoculture crops like corn and soybeans are tilled and heavily fertilized and then mainly used to feed cows. And cows themselves create methane when they digest, which is a large source of greenhouse gas in itself. So although we are growing plants in agriculture, which draws carbon down, the way we're doing it releases more greenhouse gas than it draws down. So all this is very depressing, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of it already, and it probably makes you feel anxious and powerless. So let's focus on the good news. We can make changes to turn back this alarming climb of CO2 into the atmosphere, and we don't have to wait for politicians to do it. A new book has been published with the results of a meta-analysis on ways in which we can draw more carbon out of the atmosphere than we put back in. The book is called Drawdown, and the authors have studied 100 different ways which are well known and already being done in the world, that can pull down serious amounts of carbon or prevent it from being burned in the first place. It's not enough to just reduce emissions. We need to pull the carbon back down into the earth. If we add drawdown into the equation, we can reverse the rise of CO2 in the atmosphere. Some of these things need governments or special expertise to do, but many of these things can be driven by ordinary citizens. A lot are related to the food system, and we all buy and consume food. As consumers, we vote with our dollars, so we have a lot of power. Number 4 on the list is eating a mainly plant-based diet. If 50% of the world population ate a mainly plant-based diet, we could draw down 66.11 gigatons of carbon by 2050. Creating a vision is the first step in making something happen, and then taking action. And that's why we also need artists, because you as artists are communicators. You have the power to create a vision and inspire. So I'm calling on artists, musicians, visual artists, spoken word artists to contribute and spread a message of regeneration with your art. Whether it's a call to action, to let people know that we are not powerless, that we can make change, that we can draw the carbon down. Create a love song to the ecosystems, because that's something that we really can't live without. Paint a vision of a regenerated planet. We need more than fear and urgency about climate change. We need inspiration and hope to create a movement. We need everyone to do their part, because it's not a question of know-how or money, it's a question of willingness to change our ways.